If you're still awake at this hour, you already know why. The air in my tiny, windowless cabin feels heavy, thick with the recycled breath of 5,000 souls and the faint, metallic scent of ozone that whispers of deep sea and deeper secrets. Listen closely. Right now, if you press your ear against the hull of this vessel, you can hear it, the ceaseless, dull thrum of the engines, a massive, grinding pulse that serves as the ship's mechanical heart, but also the metronome of its suffering. It's the sound of a city that never sleeps, driven by profit, floating on an abyss. Check the lock on your window just in case. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you are tonight and what time it is. Let's map the places where the shadows gather. Breathe in, breathe out, and follow my voice into the shadows. Close the door, kill the lights, and come closer. The cabin is always too hot, a pressurized box filled with the faint, persistent chemical sting of industrial cleaner and the ghost of the previous occupant's desperation. I try to listen, but all I hear is the constant, low-frequency hum of the ship's engine room, vibrating through the thin mattress. It's the sound of relentless motion, and it's driving me mad. Don't look behind you right now. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your coordinates and the local time in the comments. Let's make a map of those who choose to listen in the deepest night. Headphones on, world off. The nightmare is waiting. They call these ships floating resorts, but they are closer to maximum security factories. We are the cogs, endlessly turning, oiled by cheap caffeine and the distant promise of a paycheck will be too exhausted to spend. I was working IT support, fixing the endless loop of connectivity errors, the digital lifeline that keeps the illusion running for the 5,000 souls above the waterline. 11 months, no day off. The rhythm stripped the humanity right out of me. I became a gesture, a function, not a person. This kind of sustained, enforced labor without release causes a very real, documented psychological phenomenon known as depersonalization, a grounding fact about maritime employment. It's when the self disconnects from the body and emotions, viewing the world and oneself from a third-person perspective. Everything becomes performance. The fake smile, the mechanical apology, the endless loop of "have a great cruise." It's all just programming. And when the programming gets faulty, the system discards the unit. I saw the fault lines everywhere, but they started subtly, usually in the service areas, where the smiles were weakest. Chun, the sous-chef, was one of the first. We shared a shift-change hallway, a tight, claustrophobic corridor below the main passenger decks where the air conditioning struggled. I remember the smell, damp linen, cleaning solvents, and beneath it all, something else, a sour, sweet scent that hinted at decay. Chun looked haunted, not just tired, but actively persecuted. His eyes were wide, darting. He hadn't slept in 3 days, trying to manage a staffing crisis in the colossal kitchens of the Aeternus, our vessel. One night, I found him leaning against a cold steel wall, wiping sweat from his forehead. "It's gone bad," he whispered, his voice thin as a razor wire. "The main walk-in freezer on deck C. The compressor failed 3 days ago. We fixed the reading, but the internal temperature, it's rising." The scale of the food operation on a modern cruise ship is staggering, measured in tons, not pounds. A faulty refrigerator wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a ticking biological clock. He told me the crew, already struggling with the sheer workload, had started getting violently ill. Diarrhea, vomiting. But the head chef, A behemoth named Richter, who ruled the galley with psychological terrorism, had ordered them back to work. "We have 4,000 people to feed tonight," Liam Chin said, using my name with a hollow pity that chills me even now. Richter said if we cancel a single seating, if we report the spoiled meat and vegetables, we lose millions. And we will be blamed. The pressure was absolute. Chin had tried to escalate it, showing Richter the spiking temperatures, the questionable look of the seafood. Richter's response was a knife-edged threat: sign the usage report as safe, or find himself reported for insubordination and neglect, a black mark that would end his career globally. Chin chose his job over his conscience. He watched his sick colleagues serve the meals. And then, the inevitable consequence struck the ship like a silent tsunami. It started with isolated reports, a handful of people with stomach cramps. Within 12 hours, the ship's infirmary was overwhelmed. 473 passengers, almost 10% of the ship's population, were violently ill, some seriously enough to require emergency stabilization. The rumor mill ignited instantly, but the corporate machine moved faster than the truth. The captain, a phantom figure known only to senior officers, announced a temporary quarantine protocol, blaming a novel virus brought aboard by passengers. Forensic teams, which is to say, corporate damage controllers in lab coats, swarmed the galleys. Chun and every single member of the kitchen staff were called into the main briefing room. "You will sign this," Richter stated, slamming a pre-written declaration onto the table. It blamed the outbreak entirely on external viral transmission and absolved the ship and its systems of all responsibility. Chun looked at the document, the signature lines swimming before his eyes, knowing that 400 people were in agony because of spoiled food he had helped serve. But he signed. They all signed. They chose the floating city over their souls. Chun became an accomplice in mass food poisoning, trapped by the terrible gravity of corporate risk management. Fear isn't about what we see. It's about what we imagine is watching us. And what I imagined watching Chun was the silent, indifferent abyss of the Atlantic, ready to swallow secrets. The feeling of depersonalization deepened in me. I was sinking into the system, realizing that the polished veneer of the vacation experience was maintained only through active cruelty and continuous, conscious lies. Every perfectly plated meal, every sparkling glass, was built on the backs of people who had lost themselves. This massive vessel, this floating palace of luxury, suddenly felt like a speculative concept, a massive, isolated laboratory designed to test the limits of ethical compromise. The air of luxury was actually a pressurized atmosphere of fear. I started seeking out places where the system broke down, corners of the ship where the surveillance and the enforced cheer didn't reach. My search for silence, for just one moment of non-performance, led me down into the utility levels, the decks that didn't appear on the tourist maps. The deep chill of service was finally getting to me. I just needed to stop being an employee for 5 minutes. I needed to breathe the truth. The noise doesn't stop, even when you're sure you've found silence. It just changes pitch. Down here, on the forgotten lower decks, the ones labeled simply as utility access, the sound isn't the cheerful, manufactured music of the atrium, but a chorus of pumps, filtration systems, and the constant, cold whisper of the ocean slipping past the steel hull. It's a subterranean symphony of industrial loneliness. I was searching for a quiet corner to decompress after an 18-hour shift, trying to shake off the persistent guilt I felt just by existing within this system. The guilt of knowing what Chun had done, the sickness he had covered up. My technical access allowed me to drift deeper than most, past the crew mess halls and the tiny, overcrowded laundry rooms. That's when I heard music that didn't belong. Heavy bass, muffled laughter, and the distinct, clinking sound of glasses that weren't regulation issue polycarbonate. My rational mind, dulled by exhaustion, told me to turn back. My curiosity, sparked by the promise of genuine human interaction, pulled me forward. I stumbled upon Deck 2, a designation I only later realized was a kind of inside joke among the deeper crew. It wasn't on any public map, or even the official crew schematics I had access to. It was a section of refurbished storage bays and auxiliary compartments, repurposed by the long-timers into an illegal social space. The place was a visceral experience of rebellion. It smelled of bootleg liquor distilled from questionable fruit juices, sweat, cheap tobacco, strictly forbidden on board, and ozone. The lighting was provided by string lights stolen from a defunct passenger balcony display. Employees from every department, from engine room maintenance to high-end boutique sales, were packed together. They were dancing, swapping gossip, and drinking fiercely, shedding the mask of the servant and becoming, momentarily, themselves. This kind of secret life is a direct result of the isolation of maritime life, a known factor in maritime sociology. Cut off from shore, highly monitored, and forced to interact only within a rigid hierarchical structure, crews inevitably form these deep, clandestine social structures to survive the psychological strain. Deck 2 was their pressure valve. I was adopted quickly. They didn't care about my job title. They cared that I was another weary face seeking refuge. It was here I met Layla, a children's activity coordinator. She was the heart of the community, fierce and protective of the deck and the people who used it. She told me she was in love. His name was Julian. He was charismatic, spoke 4 languages, and claimed to be an auxiliary engineer, though he never seemed to get his hands dirty. He moved with a grace that suggested luxury, not labor. Layla was blinded by it. She saw in him the possibility of escape. They were planning a life together back on land. The atmosphere on Deck 2 was volatile, a speculative concept of a hidden society built on shared secrets and illegal contraband. This was where the real economy of the Aeternus played out. I also met Bertie, the ship nurse. She was jumpy, constantly looking over her shoulder. She told me she was being threatened. "It's the morgue, Liam," she confided one night. Her voice hushed even against the blare of the music. "It's located on Deck E, close to the cargo loading bay. It's climate-controlled, sealed, and no one ever checks it unless we have an actual fatality." The cruise ship morgue, a necessary, grim utility, was being used as a perfect, refrigerated locker for the deep-sea smuggling ring. Bertie had stumbled upon the operation. Crates of untaxed cigarettes, high-proof imported alcohol, and disturbingly expensive, non-manifested jewelry. A gang of veteran stewards and chefs controlled the traffic. They didn't just want her silence. They wanted her complicity. They told me if I didn't start using the refrigeration unit for their drugs, small bags, easily hidden, they would frame me for stealing meds from the infirmary, she choked out. The fear was palpable. I saw the corrosive power of this floating corporation, not just on the management side, but within the crew itself, where survival depended on either silence or illegal participation. Bertie, bless her conscience, decided to report it. She went straight to the head doctor, Dr. Elias, expecting protection and a police investigation. Instead, Dr. Elias listened with a cold, almost detached expression. When she finished, he leaned across the desk, his voice a low, terrifying monotone. "Bertie, this ship is owned by people who own islands. They own politicians. They own silence. You have disrupted a revenue stream worth more than your entire career. He didn't offer her protection. He offered a warning. Disappear immediately. Tonight. Do not stay on this vessel past dawn. You have enough money for a flight home, but you must quit, citing personal emergency, and never speak of this again. It is the only way to protect your life. The smuggling operation was too big, too entrenched. It was hushed up, internally managed, and Bertie was erased from the ship's manifest by morning. I felt a deeper chill set in. The ship wasn't just hiding food poisoning. It was actively facilitating organized crime and then throwing its conscientious employees to the wolves. Then the illusion of Deck 2 shattered for Layla. The revelation came during a routine customs inspection at a small Caribbean port. Julian, Layla's charming engineer, was stopped and questioned not by customs, but by the ship's own corporate security. He wasn't detained. He was escorted to the most expensive penthouse suite on Deck 12. Julian wasn't an employee. He was a passenger, the heir to the ship's biggest competitor, a corporate spy who had spent 2 weeks undercover, using an employee uniform and fake credentials to learn the internal systems, the vulnerabilities, and, most critically, the illegal operations. He was looking for leverage against the corporation. Layla was devastated, betrayed, but her first instinct was loyalty to the community. Corporate security found her within the hour, demanding to know where Julian had accessed the crew's secrets. They wanted the location of Deck 2. Tell us the access codes, Layla, the security officer pressed. And this whole incident will be dismissed as a misunderstanding. You keep your career. But Layla knew that giving up Deck 2 meant destroying the only sanctuary hundreds of exhausted people had. It meant immediate termination and potential blacklisting for everyone involved in the illegal parties. She looked the officer in the eye and refused. She stood as the sole, defiant protector of a community she loved. She accepted immediate dismissal, losing her career for the sake of an illicit, desperate social club. I watched her walk off the gangplank, a single backpack her only companion, knowing she had traded everything for the anonymity of her friends. Fear isn't about what we see. It's about what we imagine is watching us. And what was watching Layla was the unforgiving, corporate eye of the Aeternus, which demanded conformity and punished kindness. My own sense of identity was dissolving. I was trapped between the corporate tyranny I served and the ethical decay of the hidden underworld. I started taking long, aimless walks on the passenger decks, trying to find some anchor in the manufactured cheer, looking for something real, anything that hadn't been compromised. The passenger decks are a study in controlled euphoria. Everything is glossy, bright, and aggressively optimistic. The piped-in music is relentlessly upbeat, a high-frequency distraction designed to keep 5,000 people in a state of suspended reality. But if you stop, if you truly look, the effort shows. The frantic, desperate need for distraction that underlies every overpriced drink and forced selfie. I found myself lingering near the main atrium bar, watching Az. He was the main bartender, a master of psychological orchestration. Az didn't just mix drinks, he mixed people. He had turned his bar into a subtle social laboratory, a speculative concept he had refined over years. He adjusted the music volume slightly, strategically placed certain chairs, and, most crucially, meticulously diluted the alcohol just enough to increase consumption without immediately causing obvious intoxication. He did all this to boost revenue. Yes, but also for the sport of it, to generate drama, to create small, contained emotional explosions. We sell fantasy, Liam, he told me once, polishing a glass with robotic precision. And fantasy is just reality with the rules adjusted. I adjust the rules here. I watched him operate. He'd pair up two lonely-looking individuals by suggesting a specific, shared cocktail, a minor, invisible manipulation that often led to an hour of conversation and several more rounds of slightly weakened liquor. He was a conductor of casual human fate. Once, I saw him deliberately introduce a divorced couple who had booked separate trips, unknowing they were on the same ship. He framed it as a cosmic coincidence. He told the man, "The universe put her back in front of you," and told the woman, "He looks like he finally understands what he lost." AZ watched, detached, as the engineered proximity, the softened alcohol, and the high seas atmosphere worked their toxic magic. By the end of the cruise, they were engaged. AZ felt a spike of guilt, a flicker of humanity, witnessing the raw power of his manipulation, and swore off pairing people for romance. But he admitted the manipulation, the chair arrangement, the liquor dilution, that part never stops. Most bartenders, he confessed, do it on a lighter scale. It's expected, but the real evidence of the ship's ethical rot was saved, not served. Sophia, the ship photographer, became another focal point of my silent investigation. Her job was to capture the memory of the perfect vacation, the posed family portraits, the sunset shots, the glittering formal dinners. Every picture was a polished lie. She worked in a small, windowless office near the photo gallery, managing the digital archives. She was efficient, quiet, and carried a permanent look of weary cynicism. One night, while fixing a network switch in her office, I caught a glimpse of her private desktop folder. Truth Collection. I didn't ask, but she sensed my presence, my own submerged despair, and she slowly swiveled the screen toward me. "These," she whispered, her voice husky from too many late nights editing smiles, "are the real memories." They were thousands of photographs, secretly saved, documenting the psychic cost of the holiday industrial complex. There were pictures of couples, moments before she called action, their faces blank with marital exhaustion or simmering rage, forced to put on a show of happiness for the camera. There was a photo of a seriously ill child, barely able to sit up, but commanded to flash a painful, strained grin for posterity. One particular sequence of images froze the blood in my veins. It was taken early one morning from an upper deck. The sequence was fast, a figure leaning dangerously over the railing of the deck 4 promenade, the sudden, terrible lightness of a body in freefall, and the final frame, blurred but undeniable, of the splash. Sophia had captured a man jumping off the ship. She had done nothing. She couldn't have. The moment was too fast. But she had kept the evidence. "I photographed the trauma," she said, her voice dry as dust. "The industry sells joy, but I capture the truth of the cost. The despair, the forced performance, the moments of utter failure." She admitted that she felt guilty, an overwhelming sense of violating privacy, of exploiting the last moments of others' pain. But she couldn't delete them. They were her proof, her private accounting of the lies that kept the Aeternus afloat. Reflective thought. Fear isn't about what we see. It's about what we imagine is watching us. In Sophia's office, I realized the ship itself was watching, a massive entity feeding on the misery it generated, storing the evidence of its own cruelty in digital archives and silent employee confessions. The psychological weight of this sustained duplicity was becoming unbearable. I was surrounded by people who were either actively complicit in cover-ups, Chan, fleeing the ship to save their lives, Birdie, sacrificing their careers for loyalty, Layla, or archiving the evidence of human suffering, Sophia. This constant exposure to ethical compromise was slowly eroding my own grip on reality. I was losing faith in the surface world. I needed air, physical space, the opposite of the confined, poisoned atmosphere of the utility decks. I started spending my breaks on the highest open deck I could access, staring out at the vast, indifferent ocean. And that is where I witnessed the most complete distillation of the ship's cold indifference. The moment human life became a line item on a balance sheet. It happened around 3 a.m., halfway across the Atlantic. The shift from the calm, rhythmic hum of the engines was instant. A jarring, high-pitched alarm, followed by the specific, chilling announcement over the internal PA system. Condition Gamma. Condition Gamma. All hands to search protocol. I knew Condition Gamma wasn't a standard public safety code. It was a terrifying, private designation. It meant one thing only: men overboard. The sound of the general alarm at 3 a.m. is the sound of absolute panic, immediately muted by the ship's corporate veneer. The announcement, though phrased calmly, caused an internal shudder among the crew. Condition Gamma, the captain's voice stated, thin and amplified, signifies a confirmed man overboard incident. Immediate implementation of the Williamson turn search pattern. I rushed to the bridge wing, an exposed service walkway where I sometimes recalibrated communication antennae. From there, I saw the scene unfold. The massive vessel, the size of a small town, was slowly, agonizingly, attempting to halt its relentless momentum in the infinite blackness of the open Atlantic. Max was there, the senior security officer. He was a mountain of a man, usually radiating competence, but tonight his eyes were wet, staring out at the churning, oil-slicked wake of the ship. "We saw it, Liam," he muttered, not looking at me. "Caught it on the perimeter cameras. A flicker. He just slipped the rail." The reality of a person in the mid-Atlantic, alone, at night, is a horrifying biological fact. The average survival time in 50-degree Fahrenheit water, common in that part of the ocean, is often less than an hour, sometimes only 15 minutes before the onset of fatal hypothermia, a grounding fact the ship's command knew intimately. Max, with the cold efficiency of his training, had deployed the mandatory search protocol. Flares were fired, searchlights cut blinding cones through the mist, and a fast rescue boat was launched, all standard procedure. But the corporate clock was already running. I listened to the tense exchange over the radio, the voices of the bridge officers cutting through the static. Estimate search grid completion, 0600 hours. Fuel consumption for full stop and turn maneuver, X 1,000 gallons. Passenger impact, loss of 2 ports of call. Estimated financial loss, $5 million. The man overboard was no longer a person. He was a liability matrix. Max leaned in, his face ghostly in the wash of the searchlights. They could have saved him in the first 5 minutes. We knew the approximate coordinate. The moment we spotted the splash, if the captain had given the order for immediate, full-speed retrieval, there was a chance. But the captain, the same phantom figure who oversaw the food poisoning cover-up, had delayed the stop, focusing first on bureaucratic reporting and calculating the logistical cost of the maneuver. Those crucial minutes slipped away, swallowed by paperwork and profit margin. The search continued, but Max confirmed what I suspected. It was a cynical performance. At 0330, the captain used the code word condition Gamma 0, Max revealed, his voice laced with self-loathing. That code, Liam, means the search is now purely for show. We know he's gone, but we maintain the facade for the family, for the official report, and for liability purposes. We can't stop until we've fulfilled the mandated search time. This manufactured hope, the ship circling, searchlights sweeping empty waves, was a terrifying speculative concept. The Aeternus had become a stage where grief was exploited and the search for a body was a financial calculation. The internal cynicism among the veteran crew was shocking. Max showed me a hidden digital bulletin board, accessible only through a specialized crew intranet. It was a betting board. Employees were openly wagering on the outcome, survival or death, and the exact minute the captain would officially call off the search. It was a dark, callous commentary on the utter dehumanization of their world. The captain maintained the agonizing illusion for hours. Max, as senior security, was tasked with comforting the victim's wife and children, who had been sequestered in a luxury suite. "I had to lie, Liam," he confessed, shaking his head slowly. "I told the wife we had found traces of fabric, that we were close, that hope was still alive. I watched the children cling to that lie. I gave them false hope so the captain could look like a hero who tried everything." The ship finally terminated the search just before 7 a.m., citing untenable search conditions and negative results. Max had to deliver the news, knowing he had spent the last 4 hours selling a cruel falsehood. The weight of this institutionalized deceit crushed him. He was a professional, trained to protect life, yet he had been forced to participate in the slow murder of a man's chance at survival, and then the psychological torture of his family. I saw my own face in the mirror that morning, and I didn't recognize the man who had traded hope for a clean report, Max said. He resigned at the next port. He walked off the ship, leaving a high-paying, decades-long career behind, consumed by the simple, terrible weight of having lied to a grieving widow. Reflective thought. Fear isn't about what we see. It's about what we imagine is watching us. After Max left, I realized the ship watches us, yes, but its true power lies in making us watch ourselves compromise our deepest values, forcing us to become accomplices in the darkness. The loss of Max, Birdie, and Layla, all decent people broken by the system, left a void. I felt the psychological walls closing in. My IT duties became a frantic, useless distraction. But the physical danger of the ship was about to manifest, proving that the corporation was willing to risk not just the lives of individuals, but the lives of everyone on board for short-term profit. I met Anton, a marine engineer, the next day, down in the blindingly bright, brutally hot engine room. His face was streaked with grease and worry. He moved with a nervous, staccato energy that belied the massive forces roaring around us. He led me past the turbines, the scale of the machinery awe-inspiring, a marvel of human engineering. But the marvel, he told me, was severely damaged. The engine room of the Aeternus is the ship's literal heart, a roaring cathedral of polished steel and terrifying kinetic energy. The heat is immense, the noise deafening. Yet Anton moved through it like a ghost, pointing his flashlight at the propeller shaft, a gigantic piece of steel connecting the power plant to the sea. He shouted over the ceaseless mechanical shriek, his voice raw with fear. "Look closely, Liam. Right here." Following the beam, I saw it. A hairline fracture, almost invisible under the grease and metal fatigue, running along a critical section of the shaft. It wasn't a superficial defect. It was a serious structural failure. Anton used gestures and clipped sentences, explaining the terrifying reality. This crack, combined with the stress of the constant motion and the immense torque, was capable of causing catastrophic failure. If the shaft snapped, it wouldn't just disable the ship. It could breach the hull, sinking the Aeternus and all 5,000 people on board. This knowledge was a grim piece of forensics, a structural report that demanded immediate attention. Anton had immediately flagged the issue to the senior management and the captain. The conversation that followed, he told me, felt like something pulled from a nightmare. They brought in the financial controller, the corporate head of maritime safety, everyone, Anton recalled, wiping sweat from his brow. I showed them the fissure, explained the hydrostatic pressure, the risk profile. Their first question wasn't, "How fast can we fix this?" It was, "How much will it cost to cancel the next 2 legs of the journey?" The answer was in the tens of millions of dollars. Lost bookings, compensation, reputational damage. The captain's final decision, backed by corporate headquarters, was an act of pure, calculated moral depravity. They decided the probability of catastrophic failure before reaching the next major port was 15%, Anton said, the number sticking in the air like poison. 15% risk of sinking a vessel with 5,000 souls. And they took the gamble. They slowed the ship's speed by a marginal amount, attempting to reduce stress on the shaft. They applied a temporary, cosmetic patch that Anton knew was useless against the forces of the open ocean. And then they issued the threat. Anton was given a non-disclosure agreement and told that if he uttered one word about the structural integrity issue, to the crew, to his family, or to any port authority, he would be sued, bankrupted, and blacklisted globally. They had transformed the ship itself into a speculative concept, a massive, floating roulette wheel where human lives were the chips. I had to keep working, knowing that every wave, every turn, could be the one that ripped us open, Anton confessed. The silence he was forced to keep was physical torture. By sheer, terrifying luck, the Aeternus limped into its designated port. As soon as the passengers disembarked, the massive crack was discreetly repaired, logged internally as routine preventative maintenance, and never reported to any external maritime safety body. Anton quit immediately. Like Max, like Bertie, he couldn't live with the complicity. He refused to risk the lives of thousands for a 15% risk that translated into corporate profit. His departure only amplified my own isolation. I felt myself slipping into a permanent state of dread. The ship was actively concealing structural murder. What other crimes were they covering up in the shadows? My IT work required me to interface frequently with the deck staff, the entry-level laborers who handled everything from baggage to maintenance. One of them was Miguel, a quiet, haunted man from Central America. Miguel revealed a darker, colder horror that had taken place right below the passenger gaze. It concerned Jules, a young, 23-year-old new recruit who had just started working on the Aeternus. He was of the same nationality as a clique of older, veteran deck employees, a small, insular group who seemed to run their own internal hierarchy. They hated him, Liam, Miguel said, his voice barely audible. Jules was too young, too naive, too quick to smile. They bullied him mercilessly. Psychological abuse, then physical assaults, pinching him, tripping him, isolating him. This bullying, a toxic tradition in many isolated work environments, escalated beyond cruelty into pure malice. One evening, deep within the ship's internal rail system, the narrow corridors where cargo and carts are moved between storage areas, the veterans cornered Jules. Miguel was working in an adjacent storage bay. He couldn't see, but he heard. He heard the rising volume of the taunts, the thud of bodies, the desperate, strangled cry of Jules. Then, a sudden, violent shove. And the silence. The internal rail system is close to the outer hull on that deck. Miguel realized instantly what must have happened. Jules had been pushed hard, either out of a service hatch or over a railing, into an area where a fall would be fatal. Miguel froze. His job, his meager salary that supported his family back home, depended entirely on his silence. He stayed hidden in the storage bay, trembling, listening to the hurried footsteps of the veterans retreating. He was complicit in a murder. The company investigated, of course. It was unavoidable. A young employee was missing, then found dead in a sealed, high-risk area. The corporate narrative was immediately crafted. A tragic accident caused by fatigue and negligence. The entire deck staff, including Miguel, was forced to sign affidavits confirming the accident and accepting the company's version of events. The perpetrators? They were quietly transferred to another cruise line owned by the same parent company. Moved, not punished. The murder was absorbed by the system and filed away as an operational error. Miguel lives with the guilt of that silence, the knowledge that he chose his security over Jules's justice. Reflective thought. Fear isn't about what we see. It's about what we imagine is watching us. Here, on the Aeternus, the greatest horror was realizing that the corporate architecture provided perfect cover for human evil. The floating city was a vessel of both commerce and unchecked atrocity. I was reaching my breaking point. 11 months. Watching structural collapse, food poisoning, corporate gambling with 5,000 lives, and murder covered up as an accident. My father had recently suffered a serious heart attack back home, and the company had denied my emergency leave request. The physical exhaustion and the mental dread fused into a single, corrosive entity. I sat in my windowless cabin, the constant engine hum vibrating through my bones, and I saw only the blackness of the abyss outside, waiting to take the ship. I realized I was one more potential line item on the Aeternus's balance sheet of despair. The thought of permanent silence, of simply stepping off the edge, started to feel like the only honest way out of the corporate lie. The psychological fatigue was total. It wasn't just exhaustion from lack of sleep. It was the fatigue of constant, forced moral compromise. My emotional sensors were screaming, but the corporate system had muted the external volume. I felt Jules's silence, Chin's guilt, Max's regret, and Anton's terror all pressing down on me in the tiny, hot box of my cabin. The denial of leave to see my father, coupled with the systemic evil I had witnessed, the crack in the hull, the body in the ocean, the boy murdered and forgotten, snapped the final thread of my resilience. The abyss beckoned not with fear, but with the seductive promise of non-existence. I knew the ship's suicide protocol. I had installed the software that flagged unusual behavior near railings. I knew how to evade it. I walked the corridors on autopilot, seeking the highest, most private deck, drawn by the same terrible gravity that had consumed the passenger in condition Gamma. The irony was suffocating. I was serving the system until my last breath, even in my plan to escape it. But the darkness of the night shift can sometimes yield unexpected pockets of light. I was found not by security, but by a housekeeper named Elena, just as I stood staring at the black, churning water. She was an older woman, usually reserved and invisible, moving through the ship like a part of the air filtration system. She didn't grab me or yell. She simply spoke, her voice low and steady, a grounding anchor in the dizzying current of my despair. "Liam," she said, using my name gently. "The void will always be there, but the people who survive know how to build their own rafts." She knew. She saw the glazed, 1,000-yard stare of an employee pushed past the point of return. She didn't ask about my problems. She understood the problem was the ship. Elena's quiet intervention saved my life. She introduced me to the ship's most crucial, most clandestine organization, the Underground Psychological Support Network. This was a speculative concept made real by desperation. It was an organization of hundreds, perhaps thousands, of employees across the entire fleet, operating entirely outside corporate knowledge. It was born from the brutal reality of industrial psychology, a key grounding fact the company actively ignored. The relentless, extended contracts, the isolation, the cultural alienation, and the constant stress mean that depression and severe psychological crisis are endemic on cruise ships. The company's official response: immediate termination and blacklisting if an employee admitted to mental illness, viewing it as a fault in the replaceable tool. Elena took me to a storage closet on Deck B, where the door was permanently jammed. Inside, it was cramped, lit by a single battery lantern, but the air was thick with something I hadn't smelled in months: safety. There were 3 other employees waiting: a server, a laundry attendant, and a junior officer. They weren't doctors or therapists. They were survivors. The network operated through encrypted chat groups, rotating meeting spots, and a complex system of silent signals. They provided what the corporation refused: empathy, continuity, and the permission to break down without losing your livelihood. They listened as I unloaded the 11 months of accumulated horror: Chin's contamination, Bertie's flight, Max's lie, Anton's risk, Miguel's silence, and the image of Jules's final shove. They nodded. They didn't gasp. They simply absorbed the weight, confirming what I already knew. These events were not isolated incidents, but the standard operational reality of the Aeternus and its sister ships. The company thinks we are machines, Liam, the junior officer said quietly. If we show a crack, we are discarded. So, we build our own system. We keep each other alive in the dark. The network provided crucial, actionable help: tips on managing the mandatory exhaustion, secret sources of clean food and medicine, and, most importantly, proof that I was not alone in my despair. They provided a shield against the enforced loneliness. Through this network, I found the strength to keep going, not for the Aeternus, but for myself and for the memory of those who had been crushed. I started using my IT skills not just to fix the corporation's servers, but to maintain the network's encrypted communications, becoming an essential, silent part of the resistance. This underground community, invisible to the thousands of passengers above and unknown to the corporate eye, was the ship's true heart. It was a haven built of shared guilt and despair, an entire counter-society dedicated to preserving the humanity the Aeternus was designed to erase. They were hundreds of people quietly helping each other survive the psychological crises that the industry would never admit existed. I didn't quit my job immediately, as Max and Anton had. I realized my presence inside the machine was more valuable. I became a ghost in the system, fixing their computers by day and working for the preservation of my colleagues' souls by night. The Aeternus continued its endless loop of luxury and atrocity, sailing on a sea of hidden tragedy. But now, down in the utility decks, beneath the constant, grinding hum of the profit motive, there was a quiet, collective breath being taken. We were still trapped, yes, but we were trapped together, watching the darkness recede, waiting for the courage to speak the truth when we finally reached the shore. The light in the cabin is only the blue glow of my screen now, softened until it barely cuts the heavy, clinging darkness. The ship's engines have slowed to a low, soothing purr as we enter the port. The relentless rhythm of the voyage is momentarily suspended. You can almost feel the collective exhale of the crew, the brief respite before the next cycle of performance begins. I can hear the metallic groan of the anchor chain being lowered, a sound of temporary, false finality. I'm off the ship now, physically, but the abyss travels with me. The stories I collected, the lies told over lost lives, the calculated risk of 5,000 souls for profit, the hidden world of pain archived by a camera, and the murder swept under a safety report. They don't stay on the water. They anchor themselves in the mind, becoming